We are still here in Hodonoshonni, lucky enough, with Chief Bev, my first cousin, and I'm humbled in her greatness. This next question is very optional. What has been the worst moment of your life?
I had a lot of them, worst moments, and they were mostly related to my my relationships were probably the hardest. And my husband, who just recently passed away, well, it'll be 2 years ago pretty soon, we probably had the hardest times, he and I. And because of his addiction, and but the good ending is that he found recovery. He'd been in recovery when we first met, so everything was great. And then he had a 2-year relapse, and I think that was the worst. That was the worst time, when he relapsed. For those 2 years, we separated. It was also a good time for me in terms of personal growth to be by myself for those 2 years, but it was really a struggle. And his and it's a story that he told a lot in the rooms of AA and NA. He would talk about his childhood. He would talk about the things that led to his problems with alcohol and other drugs. So he would share that story. He would share his recovery story. So I don't feel really bad about saying that it's what led to his early demise. But even that was hard, helping him through those years when he got sick. But the worst part was that final really big betrayal, and us separating for those 2 years. But it was a gift in the end, you know what I mean? So it was really hard. It was really hard, but it brought us closer together in the end and after that. So we had great years after that, but that was probably the hardest, most. And when I would hear stories about people that would take a baseball bat to the car of their loved one, or whatever, for whatever reason, that it drove them to that point. And I could totally relate.
I'm the same way.
There was a day, if I'd have had a baseball bat, I'd have smashed his car to smithereens. But that was probably the hardest to know. And it's not that I didn't know about addiction. I knew about addiction. I worked in addiction. I understood it, but it didn't help, at that point in time in our life. So that was one of the hardest.
The thing that took me the longest to realize is that the recovery process starts from within. There isn't anybody you can beat your car up or beat you in the head if you don't want to, in the center. And also everything boils back to your childhood. Whatever happened to you in your childhood is going to form you for the rest of your life, no matter how hard you try. It boils back to your childhood. Now, this is a little bit of an unfair question, because I don't really ask it to everyone, but we're just poor creatures out here on Mother Earth, and you're a chief. Could you give us some advice? Where do we go from here?
Wow. One of in this position, one of the things that has become abundantly apparent to me is that we sometimes are our own worst enemy. And, it's easy to complain. It's easy to be dissatisfied with what's going on the outside. And sometimes we might take our history of oppression and use that to fall into a victim role and be able to blame somebody for human condition. And that's easy. What's hard is when we have to face each other or face ourselves in the mirror and not want to be a bully to each other or even to ourselves, like to beat up ourselves or to find it so easy to find fault with our fellow man and then beat them up for whatever's wrong. Whereas when it's coming from the outside, it's easier to have that common enemy. So we don't have a common enemy, and now we're going to work together to try to fix it. Then sometimes we seem to fall to pieces, and I think we need to step back from that and not want to criticize each other. And this comes from being in tribal politics. Like tribal politics is like an entity unto itself. So we love to blame each other and we love to beat each other up over things. So what does that say? That says that there's something inside that's all off kilter.
Right.
And that needs to be fixed up first. So we need to be kind to ourselves and patient. And then those ones that are immediately around us, we need to really watch how we talk to one another and how we make each other feel and how we express our affection or respect or our frustration or our disappointment. It doesn't have to be brutal. It can be framed in a constructive way. It can be solution-based. And so why don't we do that first before we start taking out all of our anger and animosity on each other. So if we can do that, then we can make great roads, I think. So it's very simple, it's not a big political, formula to how we get somewhere. I think it just really starts at home. It starts inside our own selves. And yes. I often wish that people would go to rehab, whether they think they have an addiction problem or not. Because I think in rehab you really learn how to be with yourself, and you have to practice naming what your feelings are. Recognizing what you're feeling and then putting a name to it and being able to express that to another human being, and then learning how to communicate, how to negotiate, how to compromise, how to have a relationship.
How to love yourself.
How to love yourself. And then you can go out into the world and deal with other people. So that's kind of how I think about what it's going to take to get us better, is that we all need rehab. Whether it's from a drug or whether it's from alcohol or whether it's from it's a behavior. It's a behavior. It's an ism. It's not just alcohol.
That's profound. Everybody needs rehab, and as you think about it, it's true.
Especially Native people, because of all that trauma that's been transmitted through the generations. So maybe we don't drink. Maybe we just go, lose it and we rage, or maybe we overeat, or maybe we smoke too much, or, maybe we're super hypercritical of everybody, and, we have no patience. There's things about us that are coping mechanisms for things that have happened to us in the past, and it gets handed down through the generations, and that's what we need to heal from. So I think rehab for everyone, that's what we need.
Well, I know Sanaguade used to tell me that we have to learn, it all starts from within. We have to learn to love ourselves. And the letter that I gave you on the man in the still water, I hope you're really going to enjoy it, because it's exactly what you're saying here. It starts, the parade starts here. And you have to learn to love yourself first before you can really legitimately love anybody else in the parade behind you that you love and support.
Yeah.
Wow. You've almost got me into tears here. I'm going to blubber like an idiot. You were born and raised right here on the St. Regis Indian Reservation. And I don't know, have you ever left?
Well, I actually was born in Buffalo. Dad was doing some ironwork out in Buffalo, so I was actually born there. They moved back home. I stayed here till, I think, 4th grade, and then we went down to Long Island for 6 months or something like that. He had a job And we came back, 6th grade, I went back to Long Island. Again, that's when he was working on the World Trade Center. Well, later. He had some other jobs in the city, and then he went to the World Trade Center. But anyway, I was there for 9 years. I hated every second of it. Every second of it. I wanted to come home. And I finally did. After I graduated from nursing school, I came home, and I've been here ever since. Worked at area hospitals briefly. I was the school nurse at the St. Regis Mohawk School for 3 years, and then I came to work at the tribe, and I worked at the clinic here. So it was about 30 years at the clinic alone, and then all my other time that I put in.
So the question I've come 7,200 miles around the country to ask you is, how do you feel about being Native?
Well, I've never had anything but pride about being Native. I was fortunate. In fact, that I was in 2nd grade, and the teacher was telling a story in the classroom about a massacre that occurred, and it was white people that got massacred by Indians. And I felt terrible about it, and it was a scary story that she told. I'm not sure if it was in the context of a history lesson, but I remember going home. My mom was standing at the kitchen doing dishes, and I went up to her and said, are we Indian? Because up until then I didn't know that we were. I mean, it's a concept that you don't think about when you're a little kid.
Right.
And she said, well, yes, we are. We're Mohawks. And I was satisfied with that, but I didn't know how to feel about it. Like, was I supposed to feel ashamed? And I must have looked perplexed. And she said, why? What's the matter? And so I told her what the teacher had told me, and she said, listen, she says, our people were a peaceful people, and we never did anything to anybody unless it was done to us first. And she said that's how that ended up being, that's why we would end up in fights like that with white people. And so we're not bad. We're not bad. As I grew older, I started to perceive how we would be looked at differently when we would go into town in Messina, that people weren't overly friendly, that they seemed to look at us kind of oddly. I remember going on a field trip to Upper Canada Village with my class, and we got off the school bus, and there was another school bus parked next to us, and it was all kids from the Canadian school system over there, and they were leaning out the window, and it was the first time and the only time that I had ever heard the term red nigger. And that's what they were calling us as we were walking by the bus. And I didn't get it. I didn't know what nigger meant. But I knew that they weren't calling us something nice. Good. And when I got home, I said something to my mom, and she was, upset about it. So, but that made me feel bad, but it didn't make me feel bad about myself or being Indian. And my dad always made it a point of educating us, even though we weren't always here on the reservation during those 9 years. He always was very proud himself, and made it a point that we learned our history and that we knew where we came from and what we had been put through the centuries. And so I've always had nothing but pride about being.
Yeah, as I travel across Canada, I've heard that expression that the Indian up there is the Canadian nigger. And I'm going to take a little pause here, and I have another couple questions, if you don't mind.